Here we are, Sunday. I have just one thing I kind of wanted to talk about in terms of this weekend. I went out and I did some errands, some running around for the retreat that's coming up next weekend, and I'm very excited about that. But I went to pick up some little things, some crayons and markers and pencil crayons and stuff like that. Some of those big white construction paper, because we love to draw and do different types of expression at the retreat. And one of the things I picked up, as everybody who was at the last retreat knows, was a bunch of little notebooks for everybody who comes to the retreat. So that way, if you have some insights and you want to write them down, or just things you want to write down, you can do so, and you don't have to worry about bringing your own notebook. For anybody who's coming to this retreat, there you go. You're gonna have a notebook. Anyway, I used to work in customer service. I used to do a lot of customer service jobs because I used to have multiple jobs just trying to survive. And the thing is, I always felt that if I'm going to be here, it's not really anybody else's fault. So I really tried hard not to take out however much I hated my job on the people I was interacting with. And I'll admit it wasn't easy. It's very difficult. Sometimes the best that you can pull off is just, thank you for coming. Have a nice day, and you're just not being edgy with them, but you're not exactly being enthusiastic. And I understand in times of stress, that's the case. But more and more over the years, I'm seeing people who have customer service jobs. And it's not that they're necessarily stressed, it's that they're afraid to talk. Like there's actually some hesitation to just express themselves at the cash with the person they're talking to. And so I'm going up to the cashier, I'm getting these notebooks, and he's just tuned out. Like you can see, like he's not sure what I think of him. He's kind of looking down, doing this whole thing. And I'm like, I'm sure you're wondering why all the little notebooks when I could have just gotten one big fucking notebook. He kind of looks at me, laughs a little. I'm like, it's because I got a bunch of people coming into town, and you might notice from all the markers and crayons and shit that we're probably all going to be high. And that was it. He just started fucking laughing. And we had a little conversation as such, but just to watch the tension melt away. And it was just because I didn't have any. But everybody else who was in line, who went to the other cashiers, it was very much just, thank you, here's your money, give me my shit, and I'm going to go. There was no conversation. Everybody's just trying to achieve an end goal, just getting their shit and then leaving. But there are all of these moments, all of these in-between moments where you can just do something that isn't just A to B. You can take advantage of the gray area between A and B, live a little, talk to someone, maybe ease their journey from A to B by just being with them for a few moments. It really isn't hard. And it can change somebody's day for the better. It can change somebody's whole week, and that can impact their month and their year and their life. And it doesn't take much except to let down your guard and, make fun of yourself a little bit. Go out of your way to have a conversation with somebody as if you already knew them. Why not? Right? Let down the pretense of having to get to know one another. Just be yourself now. Just be yourself now. They don't need to get to know you for you to be yourself. You can just be yourself. And then it's easier for them to get to know you. See how that works? I just wanted to mention that very quickly because it really is very simple. And to somebody who's in a job they don't like, who is afraid to speak, who's afraid to express themselves, who's never feeling like they're doing the right thing, but they don't want to lose their job because they have to pay their bills and all that fucking stuff. Just one moment like that kind of alleviates the rest of the stress, even for a moment. It's a goddamn miracle. From that person's perspective, it's a miracle because most other people don't do that. And it starts to feel like people just don't care. You start to get this generalized view of everybody that you interact with, like humanity just doesn't fucking give a shit. And the problem is everybody else is feeling that way too, because everybody else is feeling that way too, because everybody else is feeling that way too. And all it takes is just one person to just give a shit. That's all it takes. And all of a sudden you've stood out as an example that somebody gives a shit, and then somebody else might take the lead. And before you know it, you have a cascade of people giving a shit.
Well said. And it's actually really funny you bring that up. Was that interaction with the cashier yesterday? because I had a very similar type of interaction. So for those who don't know, I've kind of been in the same spot since the last retreat all winter, basically. And quite frankly, I don't get out a ton. Like I'll go out to eat maybe once a week or so, go out to get groceries maybe once a week. I'll go to the gym a few days a week, but there's not like a ton of interacting. And so I've been just feeling freer in myself and just seeing everything as me, my dream. So yesterday, my brother and I went to get some ice cream because I love ice cream and I'll go here and there. And so we went to Cold Stone. My mom actually gave me a gift card for Christmas to Cold Stone, so was able to use that. And there was this flavor that I created sort of last time because you get to pick your own stuff at Cold Stone. And so I I love cake and ice cream together. And so it was cake batter with yellow cake and chocolate cake. And last time I got it was a couple months ago, and my brother gave me a bunch of shit. He was like, "That's the fattest ice cream I've ever heard of in my entire life." And I was like, just give it a try. And he tried it and he's like, "Oh my God, that's the best thing I've ever had." And so we went back and we were like, all right, we just went back to get that. So we got a big tub of it. And while we were in there, it's interesting. I just have a lot less concern in general. So I'm like kind of walking around, like looking at, they have all the advertisements on the wall for like the new ice cream combos. And I'm just like pointing them out. I'm like, oh, like talking kind of loud, like that sounds so good. And like my brother's just kind of looking at me like, dude, like chill. We're getting our ice cream. And I was just like so excited. And then there were girls, like younger girls, probably like teenagers, late teenagers, and working behind the counter. And I was just like kind of chatting with them, like, has anyone ever ordered this combo before? And she was laughing and she was like, honestly, I don't think so. And we ordered like a big tub of it just because we were going to bring it home and like have for the rest of the week. And I was just kind of making jokes like, I promise we're not eating this all in one sitting. We're gonna spread it out. And it's funny because it's just, as you said, like those in between moments, I'm noticing them more, and just the opportunity to interact with people. Like there's so many chances and opportunities, even at the grocery store or something, checking out or anywhere, any place. And we've sort of lost that ability to make the most of those sort of moments. But I just thought it was very funny that you brought that example up because I don't get out a ton. It just so happened that yesterday I did, and had an interaction with someone else. But it's funny to see those as an opportunity just to communicate, like make a situation out of it. And I think a lot of people don't necessarily recognize those, because when you're so caught up in yourself and concern and fear and competition and comparison and judgment, it's like it's very difficult to make the most out of anything that you don't see as a direct way to increase your value. And like if it's not that, then it's a way to decrease your value always. Like God forbid something happens or someone thinks you're weird or something. And when there isn't that concern, it's like every situation you walk into is an opportunity to just make the most of, like not even to get anything or anywhere, but when there is no need to get anything or anywhere ever, it's like everything, every situation, every encounter is back on the table as something to make the most of.
Absolutely. And it really doesn't have to be for the point of like saving the world or changing someone's day. It really is just a repercussion of you enjoying your life. So give an example. Same thing. Yesterday, I'm out, stop at the dollar store to get some stuff. And I was looking for some kind of like, I don't know, rubber football or something, like just a ball, even just a ball. And so my wife was with me and we're in the aisle, and she's like, what are we looking for? And I was at the other end of the aisle, and I just kind of, raised my voice. I'm like, we're looking for balls. Help me find the balls. And you hear somebody next to you, and in the next aisle kind of giggle, that kind of thing. I found it funny. Somebody else found it funny. Somebody may have found that offensive. but I really was looking for balls. So the point is that you can just enjoy yourself, and the ripples are there. They're there, but it really comes down to a difference between the ripples of taking yourself seriously or not. That really is it. It causes a totally different impact when you suddenly take your ego seriously and you need to defend it, and thus you need to judge somebody and compare yourself and compete and do all that stuff. Totally different impact. If you're not doing any of that and you're just being yourself, what you're doing is you're teaching everybody around you by example that they can be themselves. It's the difference between contraction and expansion. It really is. You're just giving people space by giving yourself space. By giving yourself the space, which, why wouldn't you? It's your life. It's your existence. This is, I think, one of the most heartbreaking things about human existence is that it seems to take so fucking long to figure out, oh, right, this is about me. Not egotistical me, but the fact is, I might die tomorrow. I should probably prioritize what I do with my life and why. And that's it. Give you an example. This NPD troll that I've had, this dude who keeps coming at me and saying, you know, you're a narcissist and you're a monster and all this fun stuff. He's still at it, or at least he has been up until just recently. And it was because it really just came down to the fact that I told him, like, look, the fact that you just keep coming back really is just about the fact that you're looking for attention. You're looking for attention, you're lonely, and you want to feel intelligent. And the only way for you to do that is through comparison to somebody else. You need to tear someone else down. So if you were to just sit by yourself at home, it would be hell for you. All of a sudden, the comments just slowed right down. And why? Because I'm not defending myself. Because I'm looking at the conversation. I haven't blocked the guy. That's the thing that's driving him nuts the most, I think, is the fact that I haven't blocked him. And I haven't because, frankly, he's no threat to me. He's no danger to me at all. He's like, oh, I'm going to release a minute 20. It's going to show you as the narcissist you are. The video he released was odd at best, and it had nothing to do with me, which was really interesting. It was something about activating your pineal gland and getting your brain juice working, and it had nothing to do with me whatsoever. So the entirety of all of his commentary, where he was challenging everybody else who was asking him, like, dude, why are you being such a dick? Every time he's like, oh, check my content, you'll see why. So it was all self-promotion. That's all it was. Under the guise of him saving the world, he was trying to feel more intelligent. He was trying to ease his loneliness, get some attention, and promote his video. And so when you see that, you can interact with them differently. It changes how you look at what they're doing. Because you could react to somebody calling you a narcissist. And the fact is that almost everyone, not everyone, anybody listening to this who participated in that comment thread and didn't block this guy, kudos. Because almost everyone else did. As soon as they interacted with him, he would go on the attack, and they would have to block him right quick because he would end up going to their videos and commenting on their videos as well. This is all desperation. Right? This is all desperation for attention, for validation, for some sense of who I am. Right? And when you see it that way, you're just like, all right, man, spin your wheels. You know, I'll be honest with you. I might fuck with you a bit, right? But I'm not kicking you out, right? I'm not saying, no, I'm not going to have any of that. Go ahead, spin your wheels. You know, until you become a danger, you know, an actual physical danger. I don't actually care. You know, that's the point. But it takes a lot of work to get there, to realize it's about your existence. Your existence. These people can have a hell of a lot of influence over how you do moment to moment just by saying really mean, judgmental shit. They don't have to. See, that's the whole thing. You don't have to stop them from doing it. You can see beyond it. Right? But that means you have to see beyond it in yourself. That means that in order to stop fearing judgment, you have to stop thinking your judgment means anything about you. So there's a trade.
Yeah, it's a trade not everyone always wants to make because they're relying upon their own judgments to feel better. But, you know, as those drop, the fear drops too. It's pretty yeah, pretty damn connected, I would say. But with it's so funny after all that, he just had some fucking like third eye video he wanted more attention on. Like that's so funny after all that. But it just goes to show, like, as much as things on the surface seem one way, like he's attacking you, attacking everyone else, like he just wants attention. He just doesn't feel great in himself. And he has a video, like he has all of these ulterior motives to be doing all this stuff that has nothing to do whatsoever with anyone that he's interacting with. And that's so often the case when we interact with people. Like, their experience is at the forefront of their reality. Like, your experience is not at the forefront for them. It's always your own experience that's at the forefront. And that's how you interact with everyone else. So if someone's experience fucking sucks and they have a super difficult time, thinking about themselves and dealing with themselves, then they're going to have a super difficult time dealing with everyone else. And they're going to use all the tactics they can to try to feel better. So when you do recognize that and see, the more often you see it, the easier it gets to not take it seriously in the future. The next time a troll comes around, for anyone listening, like, keep in mind, there's probably some ulterior motives. They might have a video coming out in 3 weeks that they're getting ahead of the promotion on and just doing anything they can. And I've had that happen on Instagram too. And I have blocked a few people who have gone that far, just because, like, they'll go crazy and they'll start making things up about you. And it's like all over your comment section. It's like, oh my God, what is going on? It's fascinating. So, like, I don't know, for you with the blocking versus not blocking, like, is there a balance with that? Because I've had situations where it's just like, it's funny going back and forth and I'm like, I'll let them go. But then sometimes people are just like, go berserk and they will spend 100 comments saying all these things about you that just like aren't true. And it's like, all right, yeah, you're gonna go now. And it happens on live streams sometimes too. Someone will just start spamming the comment section and it just goes crazy. And it's like, no one can even get any other comments in. And yeah, so those situations, they're definitely getting the block. But sometimes it's fun just to interact and to show, not for them, but for everyone else who may, come around to the comments and see that, there's a way you can sort of handle these people. And there's somewhere in there that's causing them to act in that way.
Absolutely. Like, I think it's very much the difference between somebody trying to prove themselves versus somebody just being belligerent. Like, sometimes people come on, they're just hostile. They're not even trying to, what's the expression that Alexander's used? There's no mental jousting whatsoever, right? Whereas with somebody like this, they're trying to feel more intelligent than you. So you can just let them just walk themselves in circles. And that's ultimately what ended up happening with this guy, was that I was just taking things that he said to me and other people and then quoting it back to him, contradicting what he had just said. Like, and I was just basically feeding him his own shit after a little while. And so it just kept, cognitive dissonance just kept emerging, right? Because he would say, like, anybody with a brain can diagnose NPD behaviors. And somebody's like, I think you're exhibiting NPD behaviors. He's like, you don't know how to diagnose NPD behaviors. And so I just copy, like, anybody with a brain and I just quote him and respond to that, right? Like, and that's what I mean. Like, in that case, you can have a lot of fun just letting this person do their own thing. If they're being abusive towards other commenters, yeah, out the door. Like, out you go. But one thing I thought was really funny was at one point they made up this this blatant lie that I had said, I don't believe you're neurodivergent. And I never said that. Not once had I ever said that. And they just couldn't handle it. Like, I let them run for days on this premise that I said, I don't believe you're neurodivergent. I never corrected them. I just let them run with it for days. And then finally I'm like, yeah, I never said that. and that just watched the implosion, because then it was just scrambling to try and find where I had said that. And then they had to go back to this conversation where they told me that they were like a media mogul, that they had experience in multimedia, that they could make content that would just show what kind of a monster I was and all this. And I wrote, yeah, judging all of the stuff you said and your exaggeration, it's really difficult to believe that. And so they're like, aha, look, you lied. You said you didn't believe me. I'm like, about your media experience or the fact that you said you had a girlfriend. That's what I didn't believe. And so they just kept trying to take this out of context, and they've been having a meltdown ever since. And so quietly, they've stopped leaving so many comments, because they just keep coming against cognitive dissonance at this point. Right. And that's fun for me to some degree. And the reason is because that was me. I did suffer through that. I went through all of that trying to avoid the fact that I was my own problem, trying to point the finger and make everybody else to blame. Right. So again, spin your wheels. I've got nothing better to do. I have eternity. Right. It's not like I'm out helping somebody right now. I'm quite literally responding to comments on TikTok. So I might as well respond to yours. And that's it. He was just like, oh, well, obviously I'm very important to you. Obviously, you can't stand my contradicting you. You keep replying. And I wrote back, I'm like, you really haven't done your due diligence. I'm really well known for these really long comment threads.
And that just indicates how bad he wanted your attention. He's like, so you think I'm important, right? You think I'm, so do you like me? And it's like, oh man, that's tough. But regarding these types of interactions, it's so funny because people, and I've had people bring this up or say this when I'll have like a snarky comment back to someone. They're like, if they're just you, like, why are you being mean? And that's very much ties into a belief in rules about recognizing things like love, the whole shtick with like love is the answer, like God is love. It's like, no, God is you. There is no like labels on top of that. It's like, oh, God is love. And it's like, oh, so you recognize they're you. Why are you being mean? Like, whoever said you can't be mean to yourself? Like, where was that written? And if they're, they have a certain way that they're coming at you, it's like you can meet them where you're at. Like there is no rule book saying you have to, meet everyone with love. There is nothing saying that. Even through empathy and things like that, like absolutely you can recognize empathy. That does not come with a requirement to like love everyone. I find it so interesting when people will throw that back at me like, oh, you're everything's you. And then they think that comes with a preconceived way of acting. And it doesn't. It's just that spiritual sort of narrative, that spiritual shtick that like love is reality. And it's like, it's not that. There are no rules requiring you to respond in one way or another. Like it comes back to you and the repercussions you're willing to face for the way that you act in whatever way that is, whether it's loving or not loving or whatever. It's like those are just words and concepts, and they exist differently inside of the mind of everyone. And so yeah, there is no objective loving way to act either. That's just an idea.
It's like we totally disregard everything that we've ever experienced in terms of being parented, right? Because your parents love you. Does that mean they always make you feel good and tell you what you want to hear? No. No, they don't, because that's not love. That's enabling. And more often than not, it's for my benefit. I've had a great many clients who are parents to children who are adults. So not really children, but they live at home. They don't pay rent. They don't have a job. And they're pretty content to do that. Often it's because they have a quote unquote mental health issue. Usually that mental health issue comes from not fucking doing anything. So the parent convinces themselves, well, it'd be cruel to push them to do something given their mental health issues. It would be cruel, to remove my support, my comfort, things like that, or to push them. And often, even when you encourage the parent to try that, and this is an unfortunate cycle that I've been involved with numerous times now with clients, there will be pushback. Well, you don't understand where I'm coming from. That's not fair. That kind of thing, because they've gotten comfortable. They've gotten used to being at home. They've gotten used to not having to be responsible for themselves. And so there is this unfortunate period that you kind of have to go through that you should have went through before, of putting it back on them. It doesn't matter if they can leave the house or not. What matters is, are they contributing? Or are they simply existing there by virtue of you allowing them to do so, so you don't feel like a terrible person just because you're the bad guy for a bit? Sometimes being the bad guy is the only way to create positive change. Somebody's going to perceive you negatively more often than not because they don't want to change. That doesn't mean you shouldn't be doing it. See, that's love. Love is when you're able to get past how you would like to be perceived and do what's best for everybody's interest, which usually means letting go of your own shit. That's all it is. Like with my daughter, I love my daughter very much. Fact is, I often say no to things that she would like or demands. Well, why? Well, because she's growing up and she doesn't understand anything about life or responsibility or taking, carrying your own weight or any of that. And so we always give her opportunities to either earn it somehow or come to a realization that makes it more necessary to her life in some way. So that way, if she's going to get what she wants, it's also tied to something else that she is learning about herself. It's not just get me this, right? But often that's what we do. Our kid throws a tantrum. We're like, here, this is what you want. Stop. I'm a good parent now. Look how happy you are. But it's short term, and it gets more and more short term each and every time we do it.
Yeah, absolutely. And what you said about putting your preferences aside and or your concern with how you're going to be perceived and doing, what's best for everyone. When I say things like that, I get pushback like, oh, well, how do you know what's best for everyone? And so this is where the shift in mentality comes in. It's like, I know I don't know what's best. And there's a sensitivity that comes with relinquishing that idea that I could know what's best. And then you act out of that. But most people are acting out of the way that they think they do know what's best. And so they act out of that. But there's a different way of going about a situation when you understand that you don't necessarily know, but then you're almost more sensitive to the situation. Because when you do have that mentality of needing to know or basing off a book that you read, the best thing to do in this situation, there's significantly less sensitivity. You're just looking back to the rule book, being like, what do I do in this situation? I do this. Okay, sounds good. And there's very much a rigidity to that. And so you never actually know, but there are things that you can do to get closer to the sensitivity. And I think relinquishing the concern for how you're going to be perceived in this situation is very much one of them. Letting go of the idea that objectively what's best and what the situation is going to lead to and entail. And through the letting go of those things, it's you peel back some layers and get closer to what could be perceived as best, but it's just what is enacted in that moment without so much distortion. And that leads to a little bit more clarity, I think.
It's interesting. At one point, I would have explained my point rationally, reasonably, and tried to make very much the case that you're making, that it's not about necessarily knowing what's best, but coming to a state of mind wherein you can at least act intelligently in the moment without it being distorted by your bias, by your own need. I don't necessarily buy that shit anymore. I think that we do know what's best to some degree. I think that if we didn't know what's best, we wouldn't have peace negotiators. I mean, the fact is that we recognize when we're being selfish and self-destructive. We recognize there's an impact, and the only reason we don't recognize it is because we're being selfish. So we have cognitive dissonance. Anybody who's not suffering cognitive dissonance and not being selfish is pretty fucking clear about that. It's not like we don't know. It's there. Our problem is our capacity to see that clearly consistently. Our problem is that we keep getting in the way. It's not that we don't know what's best. And by best, I don't mean better than all the alternatives. I mean less costly, less destructive to everybody involved. We recognize that it's the same mechanism we were talking about earlier in the episode regarding contraction or expansion. We understand what it means to put ourselves in a tighter and tighter box. We also understand what it means to give ourselves space. That's all we're talking about, is that recognition. That's it. It's not about what's best per se, so much as what's less of a hindrance to everyone. And you can say, well, that sounds better. And it does, doesn't it? Because it's all just words. Okay? But we're talking about the fact that there are alternatives. There are alternatives, and they're not that difficult to see when you are not caught up in yourself. You can actually feel them. You can feel when you're not being authentic. You can feel when you're being selfish. You can feel when you're putting yourself first, all of that fun stuff. Right? So I would say that, yeah, there's a part of us that knows, for sure. Not again, what's best, but what's destructive. And so often we're willing to just turn a blind eye to that because we're fucking selfish. And often the person who's like, what makes you think you know what's best, is really just trying to justify shit that's going to be damaging to them and someone else anyway. That's why they don't want to listen to you, because God knows they might have to fucking learn something and change. So fuck you and your opinion. It's like, aha, I think I found part of the fucking problem.
So I'm seeing it now almost like the difference between influence and control too. Like in the moment, we don't have control, but we do have influence. Like in the moment, we don't necessarily know, future focused where anything's going, but in the moment, there's a sensitivity that you can know what's best in the moment based on the lack of distortion that you have, the lack of preferences, the lack of objective thoughts about, the way it needs to go for you. And like without so much opinion of like personal selfish preference, there's so much more of an ability to recognize like, okay, out of everything that could be done here now, like this is the least destructive thing that can happen right now. And people, I guess, will almost use the idea of not knowing. And we see it, in our community sometimes with Dualistic Unity, be it in Discord or Patreon, when people will get so caught on the side of, nothing means anything. Words are just words. Like no one really knows, no one knows what's going on. Like no one knows what's best. No one knows anything. I don't even know, like these words are nothing happening. And it's like, it's all an avoidance of the reality of being here now. It's like, sure, you don't know, what's going to happen in an hour or two, but there's like a depth of knowing in the moment, in the experience. And what you do know is that you are here now. And there's a lot to that in the moment, being here now, being the here and now, without you hindering that recognition quite so much. And so I always find it interesting when people almost take the words or concepts so far that they're like, now that's become their sort of belief system in a way. And it doesn't allow them to utilize the tools for what they are. They just throw them out the window.
See, I'm glad you brought up. I'm glad you brought it back to that, because that very much is it. Like we know, again, destruction and creation, right? We understand, and those are intimately tied to responsibility versus irresponsibility. Responsibility and awareness go hand in hand. Irresponsibility and destruction go hand in hand, because why even bother looking if you're not responsible for it? If I'm not responsible for any of the damage that I create, then I can just keep creating it and justifying it. I'm not responsible. Right. So that is another thing that we know, that we see, right? Like the reason uh, I guess people trust me in life coaching is the fact that I'm straightforward with them. And when it comes to things in their life where they're suffering, I will often bring it back to, right, but what's your take on this? Like what's your part in this? So I'll give you an example. I had a couple that was coming in, really nice couple. They had been together for, I don't know, like 6 or 7 years, met in a different country, so on and so forth. And really like hit the ground running kind of love affair. Like they had their honeymoon period. They really got involved, got a house and all that within like the first year, had a kid, and then all of a sudden it all just started falling apart. And it was because one of them was very much like a very organized person, and the other one not so much. You know, they were very much more of a, I don't know, like not, they were very laid back. They came from a place where it wasn't all like hustle, hustle, hustle all the time, right? They're like a rural area of whatever country they were from. And so they very much had that mentality. Whereas this, you know, the spouse was very much from North American culture, and it was push, 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 push. And so they started to like get at odds all the time. And he would start to get more depressed and she would start to get more angry. And so each of them would come in and they would ask me like to talk to them about this, and each of them would expect me to validate their perspective of what the other person was doing to them. And I would always go, right, but how are you responding to that, and why? Like, are you recognizing where they're coming from? Are you defending yourself? Are you afraid to change? That kind of thing. And for a little while it was really frustrating, until both of them finally recognized me. Oh, I keep putting it on them. It's like, yeah, and you can never control other people, but you can control your response to them, right? You can alter how you act in the moment with what they're giving you, right? And that is where things start to change in our life, individually and collectively, with awareness. You know, we always talk about the 7 generations thing in terms of talking about collective change over the population that the indigenous in North America used to practice. That's a lot of awareness and responsibility, and it makes a lot of sense, but we don't have anywhere near that like depth of responsibility in our culture, individually or collectively. Like we can barely deal with the debt ceiling.
Yeah, and I feel like that there's aspects for a relationship like that, but overall, it's very much because we see ourselves as, limited incarnation that's going to be gone, and you know by age 70, 80, 90, and it's rooted all in not seeing yourself as the world, as reality, as something beyond limited perception of yourself, is what so much of the lack of responsibility comes down to, I feel like. Because unless you can recognize that you're not that, unless you can recognize that you're eternal, there's a point that you're willing to go in terms of helping reality, making long lasting change. But you get to a place, because I've had these conversations with people, and they're like, oh, you're going up against a big thing here. Once they understand what identity is, and it's like and they start to recognize like how many things are reinforcing it. There's almost this like, are you really going to spend your lifetime doing this? Like, and it's like, when you have the idea that you're super limited, it doesn't make as much sense. But at the same time, and I've said this before, when people get caught up in selflessness, they think it's this thing that like doesn't benefit them at all. And there's a huge benefit to becoming more free in yourself. And that comes with questioning identity as a whole. And it's not something, you'll get caught up in thinking that you have this massive thing that you have to, work on and disarm and disempower. And it just comes down to you and your experience. It just comes down to you questioning yourself, and that shifts, internally, externally. both, neither, because same thing, but it shifts everything when you just focus on yourself. And so when I start getting into conversations with people, they'll create a sort of cerebral idea of what it looks like, and then it gets too big for them to comprehend. They're like, I'm not even gonna look at that. But it's not that. It's not that massive idea. It's just you. It's just you. But as it becomes a concept, it can get overwhelming to the point that you're just like, I'm not gonna face that. Like, what? There's nothing else to face. Everything else to face is caught up in the idea of you. Basically, everything else that you're doing is just reinforcing the illusion more and more. You're either reinforcing the illusion or letting go of it. And everything else that you would do in this lifetime is reinforcing the prison that you believe that you're existing within. This is the process of letting go of that prison. Process of being free involves this, inevitably. This conversation is what it comes to, because everything else is just, secondary and reinforces the illusion.
Absolutely. And perfect example. We have a question here. My question is, what should I do if somebody wanted to end things, but I don't? I want to hold on to it. Should I force myself to find ways to make the other person stay? I was told they wanted to end things because they think they're holding me back, and letting them go would make me a better person. Is it so wrong to fight for it, or should I just respect the other person's decision? Although that person doesn't mean it, I know they just do it in order to hurt me less. You don't know that, but so my answer is quite simply this. It really depends what you want in your life. If you want to be in a relationship where there is this constant need to be pushed and pulled, and that you're never actually at peace with yourself being who you are, where you're always worried about the other person leaving, or you're always worried that you're not enough to keep the other person around, then by all means, force yourself to try and keep it going. But what I'm saying is that you're not actually going to do any good for yourself or the other person at that point. And what I mean is that, let's just say that they are doing this because they want to hurt you less. I would say that that's probably not necessarily the case. I think to some degree they might want you to validate them. If they don't actually want to leave you, but they're like, maybe I should go so you could be a better person, so on and so forth. They might be trying to motivate you to change yourself, but they might also be trying to get more attention for themselves. They might be trying to get you to once again reinforce that they're a priority to you. And that's not a bad thing in itself, but it can get addictive. It can get to the point where you're always needing to validate that person, or you're always looking at yourself and trying to be something for them. So I don't know if that's the kind of relationship you want necessarily. I would say if somebody wants to go, if they're saying, I need to go so you can be a better person, I think maybe that's a good indication that you should not hold on to them and work on yourself. Because if you work on yourself, if you do what reality is kind of implying to you, then perhaps you'll be the kind of person that they don't necessarily feel they need to leave, because they don't feel like they're holding you back. And because you're not so focused on yourself and your need for them to be around, you can give them more quality attention so that they don't necessarily feel that lack either.
Well said. Yeah. It makes me wonder sometimes if when people say, and this is just like shot in the dark, I don't like making guesses like this or anything, but if the person, when someone wants to leave because they feel like they're holding you back, is there a lack of priority in your life, of your life? Because that can be felt, and there could be that side of it. And I think it's very important in a relationship to have your life as well, like your experiences, your things that you do separate from them. Not to say that that's necessarily always better for everyone. Some people love just like being with their partner all the time. But I think sometimes when people start to feel like they're holding you back, it could be from a feeling like you are making them the forefront of your life. And, who knows where that's necessarily coming from. But I don't know. Do you think, Ray, that there's ever a point that you should find ways to make someone stay? Like, I know you just kind of talked about that a bit, but I can't think of, if someone doesn't want to stay, like if there's ever a situation you should, try and make them stay. It seems like there's no benefit to anyone in that situation where it's like a forcing, because even if they are looking for that attention from you and then you give it, it's like, I don't know, that just gives me a very funny feeling.
Because you'll have to keep giving it. See, that's the thing. It'll never end. It's just like any other addiction. Attention's really kind of a rough form of addiction because there's so much of it around. All you have to do is manipulate. All you have to do is really just get somebody to perceive you in a certain way, and ta-da, addiction, satisfied for a short period of time. And then sometimes you'll hear justifications, like specifically in regards to your question, children, right? Well, we have kids, therefore we have to stick together because we have kids. And it's like, great. So now, unbeknownst to you, because kids are way smarter than you would like to believe they are, or are convincing yourself so you can continue to justify this charade, you're going to teach your kids that two people who don't love each other, don't get along, and would frankly rather be in their own spaces, have to force themselves to be together in a marriage. That's what a marriage is. That's the ideal relationship to grow up into, because your kids are looking at you as a template for humanity. Right. And I've had this conversation with people. If it's at that point, you're better off to be honest with yourself and your kids. Right. They may not understand because they're kids. That's pretty common. My kids don't understand taxes. My kid doesn't understand taxes. Our kids don't understand how to drive. There's a lot of things our kids don't understand. That doesn't stop us from doing it. Right? Because what are we teaching them? What example are we being? Right. And more importantly, what are we doing to our own lives? Perpetuating your suffering and somebody else's doesn't do anybody any good. Right. And this is often the case, is that we are in relationships because we're afraid what the alternative is. And of course, we rely on our brain, which is the worst fucking thing to fall back on in terms of uncertainty, because immediately like, well, if I wasn't in this relationship, and then your brain's like, all of this option, either you would end up getting dates galore, people would love you, and it's this oversimplified glorification of you just being, either the man or the woman or whatever, you're just being out in the town, getting all that action. Or there's the fear that nobody will ever love you, nobody will ever see you for who you are, or every relationship will end up being, doomed and fall into, a burning dumpster fire like this one did, so on and so forth. And so you just start thinking about the future, and your brain's going to give you everything that you hope for and everything that you fear. None of it's true. And we forget that, right? And so often people can end up kind of stuck in a relationship just because they're afraid of the future. That's terrible. And it's like staying in a prison because you're afraid of outside, right? Like, you're better off just to leave, give yourself a chance, give the other person a chance too. I mean, that's again, going back to the same topic of love, right? Is it love to hold on to someone and make you both suffer?
I would say no. But I think another fear on top of that, which is just so fucked, is like, God forbid you get a divorce and you make that sin, and and even beyond that, because I don't think people even take those things very seriously, especially like, I don't know many Christians or Catholics who are like, even know the difference between a mortal sin and a venial sin and all that whack shit. But people are doing that stuff all the time, and like, there's no concern. But there's very much the concern for, I think, more so the perception of other people as well, and the perception from your kids. And if in that situation you were talking about, where you're in a relationship that you have kids but you don't want to stay together, but you just keep doing it because of the kids, and you keep using that as an excuse, it's going to create a sort of fear in the kids too, like a fear of getting into a relationship, because it's such a final thing. Like, they'll see it as, oh, I'm in this, and based on my parents, like, they didn't even enjoy it anymore, and they stayed together forever. And so then it's like, puts this massive weight on being in a relationship, because one, you want to find someone, because oh no, or else they'll all get taken by the time and then I'll be too old or whatever. And then, but if you do, and it's like, there's so much weight in finding the right person, because we have this idea of it needing to be forever. And if it isn't, you risk burning in hell for a while. And that's hilarious that's an aspect of like people's concerns, but it is. And they'll be willing to sacrifice their life here now, the experience that they have here now for some made up idea of what's to come. But it's it's very interesting how much weight we have on relationships. And I know we have our relationship workshop and we talked about it a good amount, but I just always find it very fascinating with how the construct of marriage has just absolutely fucked relationships and put so much weight on that decision. Like, it's incredible to have the idea, because I don't hold on to that idea that whoever if I eventually marry someone, that I have to be with them forever. And so there's way less pressure going into any situation. It's like, yeah, could happen, could not, could, last few years, could not. There's not necessarily this expectation, because as soon as that expectation comes in, it's like it diminishes each and every moment to a degree, even if it just feels like a tiny bit of a diminishment. It does. And there's so much pressure. Like, there's so much unnecessary pressure. It's fascinating how much pressure and stress we just create for ourselves. But our society, you can blame society, but really it still comes down to you, the weight you put on yourself based on how seriously you take society. So it's like, yeah, society has its whole shtick with stuff and desire for control, but doesn't mean you have to take it seriously. But I always find it fascinating just how much stress we create for ourselves based on our own expectations, based on how we see ourselves, based on our need for love or to feel valued. And it's all just rooted in this deep fucking confusion about the reality of what you are. It's, believing you are what you think. And it impacts everything.
And it's really just, for the sake of the economy at this point. Like, it really is just for tax purposes. That's all marriage is really all about. I mean, at one point it was, about an agreement with God, and some people kind of look at it that way now, but I mean, that's just kind of funny. That was really what drew the line for me, was, who the fuck are you? Like, and that was really it. It was just like, who are you to talk on behalf of God? Like, oh, God says you're married now. I'm God, right? In the here and now. So if I say I'm married, it's because I want to be, right? And that should be it. That should be the only agreement, in the moment, here and now, right? And over time, the relationship can build to the point where you understand where you're not always going to get along. That doesn't have to break the relationship, because, again, that's just this superficial understanding of relationships. It's kind of like the superficial understanding of love. Love doesn't make you suffer. It's like, really? The only people who make you suffer are the people that you love, typically. Right? Because if you didn't love them, you wouldn't give a fuck. That's right. So love and suffering kind of go hand in hand. But we have this superficial view in terms of relationships and everything else. I had a friend, I've told you before, because their parents argued when they were a kid. They had this idea that, that is not what relationships are. And what's funny is that their parents were married for like 50 years or six, like they were together a long time, and they got together, they got it along really well. Yeah, sure, they argue here and there, everybody does, but they loved each other and they were there for one another. But he had this view that because they argued, that's not what a relationship is supposed to be. And so every time he'd meet a girl who liked the same things he did, talked about the same things he did, agreed with a lot of the same points that he had, and thus didn't argue, he would convince himself she's the one. She's the one, because we never argue about anything. It's like, give it time. Give it time. It's going to happen. At some point, you're going to find something that you don't agree on. At some point, you're going to find something where you diverge in your opinion of what should happen. And at that point, that's when you get to see what your relationship really is. Because up until that point, it's just been a relationship with your preferences, not an actual person, right? Your relationship with a person starts when they start making you uncomfortable.
That's a great point. But it's funny how we just build all of these things that we build, like all of these concepts we build around all of these words and things, and it creates an expectation for how it's going to go and how it should be, and then create sort of like false narratives for when you do find someone that matches that narrative that's just completely made up and isn't the reality of what it is, because the reality of what anything is isn't the concept that you think it is. As someone comes around, it's like we force ourselves. It's like trying to put a square peg in a round hole just because we have the idea that it's, that's how it should work, or that's how it should play, or we're seeing it as a square hole because we're distorted based on our perception of our idea of what we think the thing is. But yeah, if a relationship didn't have disagreements and arguments, like we're all so unique that there's no way to not have arguments about things. So it's almost more of a red flag if you haven't had arguments, or if I have some friends or people that I come across and they're like, oh yeah, no, they never argue. And I'm like, oh shit, that thing's about to explode. It's just like a ticking time bomb at a point. And so, like, not that you should force arguments because you think that's the right way for things to happen, but like they're inevitably going to come up if you're not catering. Like if you're not being an idea, if you're not catering to the person out of fear of them leaving, or catering to the person out of fear of your value being perceived in a certain way, like as that is out the window, it's going to make for the best relationship, but also one that involves arguments. Because if there aren't any, it's clear that you're each just catering to a story, to an idea, to a certain preference. And so I liked what was the last thing you said, when the relationship starts when the person makes you start to feel uncomfortable, something. And yeah, so I am excited for that in in my next relationship, whenever that happens. Just I don't know, definitely going in with more awareness and way less concern for any other relationship I've gone into. But at the same time, like, it's easy to talk the talk, but when you're in something, especially if you come across someone you really like, it's like, ooh, I can just imagine the feelings of, like, that want to not, to be liked come up. Like, it's inevitable to a degree, and it's just your willingness to set them aside, I guess. But it's never as easy as it sounds. That's for sure.
Well, especially given this conversation regarding, responsibility versus irresponsibility. If you value responsibility and the impact that responsibility has on your awareness and in your life, this is something that you clearly recognize, is going to be very difficult for somebody who is irresponsible to be in a relationship with you, because everything is going to come back to them, to you, because everything comes back to you. And that is a very uncomfortable place for anyone who wants to pass the buck to be. And that's very much the point, is that you have that tendency to. Everyone does. Somewhere along the line, we want to blame somebody else for our shit. Somewhere. And in a relationship, because what's the expression? Familiarity breeds contempt. In a relationship, you're so close together all the time. You get to know one another all the time, and they become quite literally like the face of reality for you, right? Because they're with you all the time. And just little things like the drawer is open, you walk into it, you bang your elbow because you weren't paying attention to the drawer being open. You're like, fuck, why can't you close the drawer? Why can't you close the drawer? Why didn't you notice the drawer was open? Why aren't you paying attention? All that. And if you didn't have that person there, you wouldn't be able to pass the buck, right? And you could say, well, yeah, but the drawer wouldn't have been open. You don't know that. You don't know that because half the time you opened it and you just want to blame them anyway.
Yeah, no, the responsibility aspect of anything is always a tough pill to swallow, because there's always some aspect that is your responsibility. Like, even if it seems like it's a tiny percent, even 0.5% out of the full pie is comes back to you, how you perceived it, whatever. And most of the time it's way more than that. But I'm just saying, hypothetically, even in that, it's like it's uncomfortable to recognize that little bit because you so badly want to be like, well, it was mostly on them or mostly something they did. And there's always something on your end. It's never all on anyone else. There's always ways you responded, things you did, ways you're seeing it, even in a situation where it seems like it's all on them or it's all something they did or it was all, their fault. There was still aspects that are on you to a degree, and our willingness to face that discomfort, because there's always some discomfort until you get more used to it, obviously, but there's always some discomfort that comes with like what's the phrase, like eating crow or something, that sort of thing. I don't know if that has to do with taking responsibility exactly, but yeah, there's always some discomfort, I think, that comes with that. And so your willingness to face it, you can avoid that, and it'll lead to a lot more frustration and lack of the, I guess you're always choosing between a sort of discomfort. You can take the discomfort of taking responsibility, or you can avoid that responsibility, avoid that immediate discomfort, and experience discomfort down the road, or the longer term discomfort of a relationship not going in a certain way because, or not going great because no one's taking responsibility. Or you can just continue to take it. And I think that's probably overall the least amount of discomfort, even though it seems like a lot. Like long term, there's so many more uncomfortable things that can bubble up through not taking responsibility. And so your best bet is always to take, or at least see or face that, even that little bit of responsibility that is inevitably an aspect of the situation. And being willing to face that will mitigate a lot of the long-term things. And I think that long-term discomfort leads to probably a lot of the physical suffering we experience, even like it manifests as stress, as certain other experiences and sicknesses and diseases, even, is from our lack of ability to take responsibility in each and every moment. And the more you can recognize that it's all you anyway, you're only ever interacting with yourself, it's like that is even more responsibility you start to feel. But with that responsibility comes freedom, comes, the whole great responsibility comes great power comes great responsibility, that whole thing. And and that's, recognizing that it's all you anyway is about as responsible as it can get, I think.
And I think embracing uncertainty, I think that if your relationship's not founded in the uncertainty that it could end at any point, then you're bound to be manipulative, because you're going to, without even recognize it, do things to keep the person around, which means you're going to change who you are. If you're not willing to accept that maybe they're just not going to want to be with the person that you are one day, that doesn't mean you shouldn't become that person. So it's a good thing to keep in mind. I wanted to say very quickly to everybody that we will be continuing in an hour on Patreon for a tier 2 group today, which is an hour and a half, and then a tier 3 group after that, which is another 2 hours. We love these conversations, but you'll be in a group environment. You can talk to us on the screen. You can ask us questions. You can type in the little chat section. We try to get to everybody's questions. We can get as personal as you like, because of course it's behind the Patreon gateway, which means the total privacy. Nobody except our Patreon members can watch those videos after the fact. They never see the public, unlike this episode, which will of course be public later, as I believe Raw episode 44. We have a question, and that's another thing I wanted to mention. Thank you to everybody who's currently in the comment section watching this live stream and asking questions. We really do appreciate your participation. We appreciate your insights, and we appreciate whatever direction you are helping us establish as we go moment to moment in this podcast episode. So here we are. How do you overcome moments where you know there are things you want to accomplish, but for some reason you can't get past different blockages of thought? Is it better to be in the moment and deal with the shit and not get anything done, or try to juggle both? Okay, so I just want to, I'm going to weigh in on this quickly and pass it to Andrew. For me, this actually started becoming a physical sensation after a while. It actually started to get to the point where I would recognize that almost you start to feel hot and frustrated and angry because you can't find the answer, and there's almost like this desperation, like, Jesus Christ, what the fuck, I can't get out of this, like I can't find what I'm trying to solve. Just ease off, give yourself some time, it's going to pop up, right? And the more that builds, just recognize the closer you're probably getting. I mean, at the end of the day, but it really is just mitigating how invested in that feeling that you can't get anywhere you become. Like, really, just don't get as invested in that idea that you're not going anywhere. You absolutely are. It doesn't matter if it's a blockage of thought. It's not. It's a fragment that hasn't come together yet. You just got to keep swimming through them. It doesn't feel like you're going anywhere because your brain is trying to put shit together. It's not going to do it on the fly all the time, especially if it's something that's quite complicated or involved. And so sometimes you've got to just swim through it. And so this is something that I eventually learned how to do, was instead of being frustrated, I would get to the point where I would just go, I'm just going to sit. And I would just look at the project, or I'd go for a walk, and I would just remind myself that my brain is still processing it, even if I'm not focused on it. And so you start to have a little bit more faith in yourself, right? So to answer your question, you kind of still have to go through the shit. You're going to feel frustrated. That's okay, right? Don't let it frustrate you that you're frustrated, if that makes sense. Don't do the frustration square thing, is what I'm saying. Because eventually, by virtue of time and attention, it's going to get resolved, right? That's it. It's just, how much are you getting in the way of that process? How much are you beating yourself up because you have an obstacle, as opposed to because you're still problem solving? So you might look at it as an obstacle, but it's a step along the way, right? It's kind of like the invention of the light bulb. You know, he was asked, like, how do you feel about failing like 1,000 times before being able to create this? He's like, I didn't fail 1,000 times. I learned 1,000 ways how to not make a light bulb.
Yeah, and I think sometimes the process can be, or the processes can be seen as two separate things. But as Ray alluded to, like, the brain's always going to be processing it. And so dealing with the thoughts, blockages, and doing shit in your life aren't mutually exclusive. Like, they're going to be happening. And actually doing shit, I'm not saying that you ignore everything that's happening, but at the same time, like, you kind of can, like, we get this idea that as things come up, as insecurities arise, that we have to, like, work on getting rid of them. It's through the lack of concern for them, like the lack of how much attention you pay to that, and your focus on the situation at hand, the thing that you're working on, the thing that you're doing, allows those to pass by. It's like the I think in our episode with Alexandra, she brought up the example of, like, the sushi cart going around, kind of like your thoughts being a sushi cart. And sometimes, you know, you see one. It's typically, it's not that you see one that you like and you're like, I really like that thought. It's you see one that you don't like. And so it's like seeing a piece of sushi that you don't like and getting really angry about it and being like, I don't like that one. It's like, dude, it's a sushi train. It's gonna keep going. You don't have to point out that one that you don't like. You can allow it to, you know, keep moving along, moving through the train, allow your brain to keep processing things. It's not necessarily something you have to get in, like a, you know, like a car engine. You know, your car breaks down, you got to get inside the engine and work on it. It's like, imagine if the engine had a process that if you got out of the way, it was able to fix itself, sort of, and you getting in is actually just stopping the process from happening. Like, it's happening as long as you're not in there trying to fix it. But so often, and based on the egotistical mentality, we always feel like we have to be doing active things. We're going through something. I have to solve this. It's like the baseline is things getting solved, things working out. And so the less you feel like you need to get involved and get in the way, the more you're working through it. like it's happening. You're making progress always. It's happening in the background. You don't necessarily have to feel like you're the one doing it and actively getting in there. And so I would say that that process is happening, but just because it feels uncomfortable, it feels like, a difficult thing to do doesn't mean that you shouldn't do it. Going through all of the things, continuing to do things and not paying quite so much attention to what your mind is telling you about it, because it just keeps trying to settle upon stuff. It just keeps trying to, figure things out and solve things, and the things are getting solved. It doesn't have to always do the solving. And so I think continuing on and allowing that process to happen is usually the most efficient way to work through it. But there's a lot of things. There's a lot of things. As many things as have been built up, is as many things are going to have to get worked through. So that does take time, but it's always working through it here and now, and it's happening no matter how much you feel like you were involved or not.
Nice. Absolutely. Time and attention. If it means something to you, it'll eventually work out. Just keep at it, or you'll learn something along the lines where you go, shit, that's not the direction I want to go in. And you'll find another way. But that's the whole thing. When I see plants cracking the pavement and growing through it, I very much think of our awareness, because that's very much what we're like. We have another question. We have a couple of questions. I am a people pleaser. I am always putting others over me, and when I don't please them, I have this anxiety. How do I overcome this? So here's a good way to switch that around. People pleasing isn't actually putting others before you. It's putting you before them, because you're not being yourself. So you're trying to manipulate them to stay around because you have a sense of lack. So people pleasing isn't actually people pleasing. It's you pleasing under the guise of pleasing other people, because otherwise you would have to take accountability for being manipulative simply because you don't want to be alone. So it's not actually people pleasing, it's you pleasing. And if you keep that in mind, that means that when people are pleased with you, they're not actually pleased with you. So you're not actually helping yourself. They're pleased with the person you're pretending to be. And eventually that's going to come full circle. And you could be surrounded by people, and I know this personally, you could be surrounded by hundreds of people who think that you are just the best. And it's all based on people pleasing. They don't think you're the best because you're not being yourself. So the best thing you can do for everyone is just show them who you really are, whether they like it or not. And what you'll find is that the person that they do like, when you have somebody who can appreciate you, actually likes you. Not because you're trying to please them, but because you're giving them enough respect to not do that.
Well said. I do not have much to add to that. All I'll say is that that process gets easier the less you feel like your value fluctuates. And the side that's more uncomfortable to let go of is the idea that if you were able to have this idea that you pleased someone, your value doesn't go up. Your value doesn't go up when someone likes you. Make it a lot easier to recognize your value doesn't go down when you perceive them as, not liking you. But yeah, and then everything Ray said pretty much. But yeah, I saw we had a couple other comments. Where was that other question? Oh, here we go. Ray and Andrew, do you guys feel like things resolve themselves when you just rest mentally? I think that's pretty tight.
That.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I think everything we said for the 2 questions ago was pretty much that things are being healed. And we talked about this last week in some episodes too, or maybe that was on Patreon, but things are being the baseline is things healing. If we're always out there saying we got to save the planet, we got to save the world, we got to fight this, war on that. It's if we just step the fuck out of the way for a little while, things would go back to a very peaceful equilibrium. And it's us trying to get in the way and trying to fix everything that usually fucks it up, because we're coming at it from a divisive mentality, from lost in concepts, lost in ideas, lost in the idea of ourself and our desire to feel better. So yeah, both at a collective level, but also at an individual level. You don't have to feel like you're solving everything and fixing everything all the time. And the less you're involved in things and even the need to fix things, because usually when you're super caught up in the idea of yourself, you need rapidly to fix things, or else, God forbid, your value will diminish. So yeah, I would say that the more you can step aside, things are always working, always making progress, always working through things, whether you feel like you are or not.
I think that's it. Like we kind of forget that you don't have to be judging your progress or measuring your value or any of that to just participate. Just participate. Just put in everything you can to everything all the time. And you don't have to judge yourself if you're just participating, because at least then you're putting in everything you can. You're not even going to get to a point where you're like, well, I could have tried harder, because you can't have tried harder. You're putting in everything you can. And I don't mean constantly doing all the work possible, but just paying attention as much as you can, keeping yourself out of the way as much as you can. So when somebody comes up to you and they're like, hey man, can you give me a hand carrying this? You go, yeah, why not? Without thinking, well, what's in it for me? What else are you doing? Standing there with your thumb up your ass? Go and give that person a hand, right? Like, it's important to recognize that the reason we don't do that stuff voluntarily is because, frankly, we're too full of ourselves. We have too much weight as it is, that we don't want to help anybody carry theirs. And that's how they feel. And so all of us perpetuate this goddamn nightmare simply because, again, like, we're not being responsible. We're not being aware of how much we're carrying and how much we're doing to ourselves moment to moment with this fiction that our value fluctuates.
Well said. Yeah, yeah. There's a comment in here asking, yeah, we start this every Sunday at 11 Eastern time, 8 Pacific time. So yeah, every Sunday and Monday. And then Tuesday is either call-in show or roundtable. And then groups, Patreon groups, Sunday through Thursday every single week. So lots of stuff there, lots of chats, and then we got all our episodes as well that aren't publicly scheduled. But yeah, it's been fun. We got our retreat coming up on I'll be there in 5 days on Friday, and then all next week, Vancouver Island, chilling in heaven at a Dualistic Unity retreat. And for those who missed this one, got another one that's tickets are on sale for the Netherlands in November. Going to be a bit of a bigger crew, but there's already 10 tickets sold. So hop on those, because we still have 8 months left and probably start going pretty quick here. But yeah, couldn't be more excited for that. And then working on some scheduling for 2024 and an even further part of the world from where we're at. So that's gonna be awesome.
Yeah, that's going to be a lot of fun for sure. So somebody's asking, are you deliberately doing this on Sunday when people would traditionally go to church? I wouldn't say it's deliberate, but it's awesome. And it's just because, honestly, if you're going to do something that has anything to do with connection to the universe, God, so on and so forth, why would you go and talk about fiction? If God is anywhere, it's here and now, right? And oddly enough, the only thing that's really here and now is you. So we found God. There's nowhere to go, and church is just kind of irrelevant and pointless at the end of the day. It's more of a removal from God than anything else. And so we just like to spend time with one another. Andrew and I start with these chats on Sunday, and then after that, we have 3.5 hours of group discussions on Patreon after this, because this is what it's all about. It's so interesting because we love doing this podcast. We love having these conversations, but it's the conversations with all of the community members. It's the getting in, to the details and questions and challenges, hearing their victories, hearing the things that they're going through. Like, all of that stuff informs everything we do here, informs everything I do in my life. It's given me quite a few insights leading up to this retreat right now. And honestly, somebody said last week, I think it was, could you imagine talking 5 days a week? Yeah. It's not easy by any means, but it is easier as a result of the entire community basically giving us insight to work from. That's why we're so grateful to be involved, because if we weren't so involved with everybody in this community, we wouldn't have all of these insights necessarily to share, because we're all learning from one another. That's a big part of the journey for me, is recognizing that I don't know shit. I am not a teacher by any means. If anything, I'm just working on being the best student possible. All I'm doing, and talking to everybody else about, being a keen student, not to pass a test, but because it's fun to learn things and you get more out of it when you get into it. That's it. There's no teacher here. I got nothing to teach. I got some shit to share, but it's up to you what you do with it. Right. I will never, ever believe again that I can teach you something, because I can't. If you don't want to take it in, you don't have to take it in. Nothing I do is going to pound that into your head. Nothing. And so it's not worth it. I'd rather just be myself so you can do the same, and together we grow.
Yeah, well said. There's always going to be inherent distortion when you're trying to teach someone something. And it's fascinating just how, I don't know, how caught in the illusion we are, in the sense of I don't know, just being so divided with things. But yeah, recently, I don't know, shifting gears a little bit. I've since last week, we had that one Patreon call where I was talking about how, like, just recognizing how clearly, with everyone's name on the screen, I don't know, there's like 20 people in there, and it was like everyone, I had some semblance of a story with everyone that comes with the name and all of those things. So for the last week, or at least last few days, that's been hitting me more and more, how like none of the things, like I've been walking around basically not labeling everything quite so much, and it is a very trippy experience. Like it gets me back in the recognition that this is all a dream. This is all my dream, but it's getting more like palpable in a sense. Like even talking with Ray right now, it's like that's not Ray. And when I don't have the narrative of like Ray there, or anyone else's being the name, being the even tiny semblance of a story that comes with that name, like of course it's your dream. And so I've been walking around like that, and it's weird. Part of me almost doesn't even want to say it, because it just seems like it almost feels like in Inception, when they recognize it and all of a sudden like everyone turns at them. They're like, when they see that it's a dream, or something like that. So there's a strange hesitation inside of me to be expressive about how much I'm seeing it as a dream right now, because it almost feels like I'm not contradicting, but what's the word when someone, like, not backstab, but starts with an R, maybe. Like when someone backstabs you,
Betray.
or yeah, betray. It's like I'm it's like a weird betrayal feeling. I don't know what it is, but it's very strange. Like it's almost like you shouldn't know this or something, but it's me knowing it of myself, because there's no one to tell me that I shouldn't know this besides myself anyway. I don't know. It's fucking it's fun, but it's very relaxing. I will say that. But I don't know. It's interesting for sure. It's like getting more palpable.
That's awesome. That's really interesting. And welcome to the party. So what's interesting is that you're going to keep, butting up against that to some degree. And it's not so much betrayal so much as, I don't know, the abandonment of everything you know. Like it really is like, everything you've been raised to believe in, everything you've been raised to value, and everything that everybody else around you values. All of a sudden you're looking at it going, that's not it though. And nobody gets that around you. Very few will. And for a while, that feels difficult because you think you have to integrate it. But it's kind of like the conversation we were having on Discord recently about like concepts and teaching people things from the past and all that stuff. And it's like, you could just embody all that and just not be selfish. Like when you're talking to someone, just don't make it about you. Right. And in that miraculous action of just not making it about you, you've done them more of a favor than you would ever do by telling them, this is all a dream, right? Because they're just going to think you're crazy because that's not within the spectrum of things that they are able to see or even entertain as being possible in the same way that you would have looked at that at one point in your life, right? Because it's threatening from a certain level. But somebody who is perfectly at ease with you, somebody you can chat with, you feel like you can be yourself with, in the middle of a conversation, when they address, say you've asked them about the afterlife, or you talked about your fear of death, and they kind of just giggle to themselves. They're like, honestly, I know none of that's really what it is anyway. And you don't even feel the urge to go and tell them more. You're just like, nah, that's not something I worry about. That person is going to wonder what the fuck you are talking about. And they're going to ask you, right? Or at least they're going to have some curiosity. And that's going to lead them in a path that you could not have forced them down. Not without betraying the point. Not without making it another concept for them to chase. And that's very much what I was saying yesterday on Discord regarding, spiritual intelligence levels and chakras and all that other crap. Right? Like, yeah, it's all interesting stuff, sure. But more often than not, it's more of a trap than just being yourself with someone. Because that's all this is about, right? It's connection, actual connection, not the theory of connection, not the fucking philosophy or the belief in connection, right? Fuck all that noise. Let's really get down to fucking business here. This is about connection, which means putting your shit aside and your need to be a teacher and just being yourself. Because if you're connected to what you are, not the concept, the reality, then you are doing all the work you can do because you're allowing others to be themselves. Not about convincing them of anything. Who are you trying to convince? And what are you trying to convince them of other than a story that validates your fucking character?
Yeah, and that's what I'm kind of feeling right now, is almost like Dao De Jing sort of feeling, like those who know don't say, those who say don't know, those who try to convince don't understand, those who understand don't try to convince sort of feeling. Because if you do recognize, and right now it's like I'm like sinking into it, like I don't know, it's almost feels like a weight in a sense, where it's like, oh, because it's not just right now, it's always forever, for eternity. Like it's always just been me interacting with myself, and so in that, like the depths of that recognition, there's no one to convince, because there's no point in that. But also, are you like, once you recognize that, like, why would you want to spend your time like trying to convince other people if you already know or see that and are experiencing that? It's like, go fucking experience that. That's fucking awesome. Like, why spend some of the time trying to convince? Like, ooh, this has hit me in a way that it hasn't before, because I feel like I'm just sort of coming out of that desire to like tell people and like convince people. And I was deep in that probably last year more so. But the more I'm starting to see, the more it's like, why the fuck do that? Like, why the fuck not just have conversations with people and interact with more of yourself, with no need, no desire, no expectation for how they're going to respond, no need for them to see you in any sort of way, because like there's beauty in all ways that anyone could perceive you, and the fact that anyone can perceive you in multiple different ways is fucking incredible. Like, it's beautiful. You can't have it both ways. You can't have one side because it informs the other. And so why would you want just one side anyway, unless you're trying to feel better about yourself? What's there to feel better about when you're seeing it all is your dream. Like the deeper you go into that, there's so much less concern for, I mean, deep down, like there's less concern for like, the state of the world in a sense, but very much so for how well, how much people get it, how much you can convince other people. Cause like it's kind of irrelevant to your experience. Like you have your experience, make the most of it because it's all your dream anyway. And I don't know. So all that, it's starting to make more and more sense why the convincing or anything is just so unnecessary. And it gets clear in like a different way the deeper you go with it, it seems like.
And that's why I walked away from YouTube back in 2006, was because it dawned on me I was still trying to teach people. And it was because I didn't want to let them go. I didn't want to let people go. And so I needed someone to teach. Right. And that was a lack of faith in myself, wasn't it? So I was really just trying to avoid the whole thing by making it about other people getting it. And it's not at all. It really isn't. It's just about you. It's just about you not teaching anyone anything, because God knows they don't need you to fucking teach them. They need to be responsible. They need to want to learn. And that has nothing to do with you being a teacher and everything to do with you wanting to learn. We're all in this together, in that we're all you. But it's your intentions that change everything. And I don't mean your egotistical intentions. I mean your intentions from moment to moment, and that is action. That has nothing to do with choice necessarily. Yeah, that's interesting. I caught this actually in something Krishnamurti was saying the other day. I was like, oh, that's fucking good. He was saying that choice really comes down to us weighing what is good or bad in the moment, what is preferable versus what is not, which is based on a false sense of certainty. So when we choose, we're doing so from the ego, but when we act, we're doing so from the present. And so action is almost beyond choice, in that it is just will embodied, and that is you being reality without division or the perception of. That is something worth exploring. I really enjoyed catching that yesterday.
And there's a very large aspect of choice that implies division too, right? Because that, I'm choosing between, as if you only have fucking two things you could possibly do in all of reality. Like what? That doesn't make any sense. You have an infinite number of options that you can choose, but it's not so much a choice, because when you recognize infinity, there's no like there's no I don't know, it's an infinite spectrum, so you're not even choosing, because there's no finite amount of things that you're choosing between. Like there's an infinite number of things to quote unquote choose to do, and there's an infinite number of iterations to do the things that you could possibly choose. So it's like infinity on infinity on infinity on infinity, which is just fucking infinity. And so yeah, it's not even about choice, because it's you choosing as opposed to just being it. Like choice so much implies, like when you get caught up in choice, it's like, oh, I have these two things. It's like, all right, you're just not looking at all the other things that you are and all the other things that could be from that. And it has a completely different feeling to it. Like that was yesterday. I made a joke on Discord that I was in preparation for the retreat. I took a microdose and smoked a bunch like all day, just like get in the zone. And I just I just worked on, I just did a bunch of clips in the morning for the most part. And it was funny because it was like this deep, I was pretty high, and I was in like this deep focus. And it was also, I was going through like the second half of episode 1, and it just absolutely makes me laugh so much, like how much is in that episode that we've like gotten, then it, like an insight from that you said very clearly and articulately, like hit me in a way in like fucking season 4. And then I'm listening back to season 1, and I'm like, holy fuck, you said that exact thing in there. And I was just not in a place to hear it. I wasn't in a place in myself. I mean, I did. And it's like, it makes me wonder how much that just like that hearing that was then unraveling over the course of a year to then it come back and hit me again. But it was a cool sort of focus. And I remember a few times my brother would walk into the room and there was such like a intense, like that was my whole world, that I could feel someone else, or like, see out of the corner of my eye. I just kind of like turned because I was pretty fucking high while I was doing it. But it was a lot of fun. It was just like kind of a fun experience. And I've been getting my reps in, getting my practice and being high, and just being more and more comfortable in that experience. But it all sort of ties together, like seeing more and more clearly that this is my dream. It's like there's so much less concern for anything, like any way that anyone's interacting. And you can, if you act in a certain way and someone does judge you, it's almost like I see that as beautiful. Like the judgment of Andrew is a beautiful thing. Like that's amazing that can happen. I am so happy that I can be judged, because like, what's the alternative? What's the alternative? That everyone has a unified perception of everything. It's like, that's frightening. That scares the shit out of me way more than getting judged super hard by a bunch of people.
Now that's interesting because it's funny. The ego immediately thinks to power. As soon as when you think about a problem, the ego is just like, well, we just need more power. That's all we need. Just need more power, more control. Fucking got that shit solved. No problem. And so every religion wants to be the religion, right? Every government wants to form a fucking world government to some degree. Like it's always just a centralization of power. And yet it's so interesting that the one religion is none, right? That's the one thing that binds us all together. That none of those fictions are in reality. That reality is reality, and that is what binds us together. So the only unifying religion is zero, none, no religion, no belief, nothing to identify with. All of a sudden, we are all in the same fucking boat, right? With the government, it's kind of the same thing, right? Like we keep trying to think about the centralization of power. The fact is that each community should be its own government. Each community should be its own government. And what happens when you do that is all of a sudden you have the distribution of all of these resources rather than centralization of all these resources, making it fucking difficult to create an army. It changes everything. But the bigger the countries, the bigger the armies, the bigger the economies, right? The bigger the identification. It really just comes down to everybody having their own little community. So the only thing you identify with is where you live, right? Not the group of people, but where you live, right? And you work with the people that you live with because it's relevant to you. All of a sudden, voting means something, because it's not going to be overridden by someone towing the party line because there are no political parties. Everything changes. And it's so funny because immediately the ego, and I know, oh, you're talking about anarchy. Yeah, kind of. It's just that I have faith in people. And that's really it. I have faith in people. What our biggest problem seems to be is simply that we have gotten caught up in psychosis. We've gotten caught up thinking that our thoughts are reality. And in that illusion, we do nothing but see enemies. We do nothing but see people to compete with and compare with. And it changes everything about our life simply because of that. Simply because of that. So, I mean, what are we talking about? Revolutionary change. We're talking about recognizing you're not what you think you are, that your value can't be lowered or raised, and then just getting the fuck out of the way and letting humans figure it out. I think that's great. I love just how organic that sounds, almost like a changing mind.
And as you change, it changes. But through this and through recognizing, more and more the reality of you, like there's more willingness to get into it, but there's also the priority of making the most of it, like less starts to weigh you down in the sense of concern and like concern for other people, because there's like an element of a desire for control when you're concerned about things, as if you know that what's happening with them isn't what's best. And I don't mean concern for like a lack of empathy, but just there's like another type of concern that we have where we're very much putting ourselves on a pedestal, like we're seeing ourselves in a certain way, and from an egotistical point of view, I mean, and so we need to instill our ideas upon everyone. And it could be making, you could be perceived as making the most of it, but I think it's very much just trying to feel better about yourself. And when you're not so concerned with feeling better, like you might as well make the most of every situation that you go into. Like, why the fuck wouldn't you make the most of every situation? And it's through that. And this even comes back to what we were talking about earlier, the in-between moments, as Ray put it, that why wouldn't you make the most of that? Like, that's the entirety of you, is that experience right there. There is not a you that exists separate from this experience that you're having. There is not a you that is being judged or validated or built up or torn down in the situation. You're just the situation. And like, that's the extent of you, of what you are in that moment, is that. So you might as well make the most. And through making the most of it, everything starts to change, because there's a different mentality when it's not a concern for second you, the idea of you, and you're just making the most of it for the sake of it. Like, you might as well focus on everyone else, and not, again, not in the sense of trying to get them anywhere, but just making the most of the situation for everyone. And so there's just a whole different, I don't know, mentality, idea, desire for things going into everything starts to be. But yeah, fuck. Yeah.
It's good fun, right? Walking around, not needing, recognizing that serving actually does everybody a benefit, just because what else are you going to do? You have eternity, right? And it does change your perspective, not like a belief does. See, that's the thing, is that a belief doesn't have the same grounding, doesn't have the same foundation. A belief can be threatened. If you can't see it, it can be threatened, right? When you recognize eternity, when you recognize yourself as reality here and now, all of a sudden it really starts to settle in, but it settles in layer by layer by layer, deeper and deeper and deeper. And what's funny is that, as Andrew was saying, you will hear the same shit and it will hit totally differently, for sure. And it's just because it's always right in front of you. That's the thing, is that you are always right in front of you if you're willing to look. And most of our problem is that we would rather see the division and believe it than recognize the alternative. And it's a perfect distraction from that alternative. It's about as real as an illusion as you can get, because it's as real as you are. But it really is just you. And everything will confirm that when you have the clarity to see it, which is kind of funny. So this has been a fun conversation. I had no idea where this was going to go. As always, we're going to continue on Patreon in about 15 minutes. If you can join us, patreon.com/dualistic unity. Do check out the Netherlands retreat tickets. They are available on our website at dualisticunity.com. I do want to say one quick thing before we wrap up here, though. I receive a lot of messages from people, and they ask a lot of questions about, how do I really get this? I'm really wrestling with the understanding that I am everyone and I am myself and all of that other fun stuff. Go and check out season 1, because each and every person who has sent me that message has listened to like 4 episodes from season 1 and then skipped ahead. Season 1 is basically a crash course in all of the deepest shit that I could pass on to Andrew within the 14 episodes that we recorded. Season 2 is 21 episodes of Andrew and I basically fleshing all of it out. So season 1 and season 2 are basically, if I was going to say anything, kind of recommended reading or recommended listening for this ongoing conversation, because I spent 20 years trying to compress and distill insights into something that was easy to communicate. And then along came Andrew, and season 1 is everything that I've managed to distill up until that point. Everything I could pass on that would make any degree of sense without adding to the distortion or the confusion that Andrew might be experiencing at the time. Season 1 has a lot of value. Go and check it out more than once if you haven't checked it out already, because there's a lot of good stuff in there. And I personally look forward to our commentary series where we go back and we go through all of those episodes one by one together.
Yeah, that's going to be a lot of fun. But yeah, because we can tell how many listens every episode gets, and there's a noticeable drop in season 2 versus 1, 3, and 4. So season 2 is very, very important to the conversation. There's a lot there, and there's a lot throughout season 1. Absolutely, like getting through those in chronological order is your best bet, I would say. But again, if you have questions as you go, Patreon's the spot to do so. Guaranteed question discussions there. We can't avoid them on there. So yeah, definitely join there if you got any pressing questions. But this has been a lot of fun, and I will talk to some of you in about